Welcome back. In today's Explainer, we're diving into a really fascinating book review from the Open Volume that looks at Jonathan McGill's commentary, The Living Text Jonah. Now, if you're sitting there thinking you already know the story of Jonah, the rebellious prophet, the crazy storm, the giant fish, well, get ready for an absolute paradigm shift, because McGill is stripping away literally centuries of Sunday school domestication here to show us a much deeper, much more intense theological narrative.
I mean, seriously, what if the whale is actually the least important part of the whole story? It's the one detail everyone fixates on, right? But McGill argues that the big fish is really just a delivery mechanism. Think of it like a divine Uber. It's just the vehicle God uses to keep his prophet alive for a second commission inside a massive cosmic drama. So the real story here? It isn't about marine biology at all. It's actually about an ancient turf war between the divine and dark territorial forces. Section 1. Beyond the big fish. A paradigm shift. Okay, let's dive right into this and unpack McGill's central thesis. Notice the stark contrast in how this story gets told? Over on the domesticated side, we've got the version practically all of us grew up with. It's a fairly simple morality tale about obedience, right? You run from God, you get swallowed by a fish, you finally learn your lesson. But then we have McGill's Jonah. And in his view, this book is actually a massive narrative of cosmic reclamation. He argues that Jonah's reluctance wasn't just him being a coward. No, it was a structural, theological protest. See, Jonah deeply believed that God's compassion should be Israel's proprietary possession. He absolutely did not want God sharing that grace with the brutal, disinherited nations of the world. Section 2. The Cosmic Turf War, Gods and Sailors. Let's move on and see exactly how this builds.
Okay, to really wrap our heads around McGill's point here, we have to talk about the divine counsel framework. Relying pretty heavily on the scholarship of Michael Heiser, McGill basically anchors the whole Jonah story in the ancient worldview found in Deuteronomy 32. And this is the theological concept that at the Tower of Babel, the nations of the world were disinherited by Yahweh and basically assigned to fallen divine beings, real territorial powers. So, if you read Jonah through this specific lens, Nineveh isn't just a city of bad people. It is literally powers-held territory. That means Jonah's mission is a literal border crossing behind enemy lines to reclaim a disinherited nation. The guy is stepping straight onto a cosmic battlefield. And this whole cosmic conflict is brilliantly illustrated during the storm in chapter 1. McGill does this great literary analysis of the Hebrew word for fear, rā'āh, and tracks how it escalates. At first, in verse 5, the sailors are just scared of the storm, so they cry out to their own territorial gods. But those gods, they are totally silent. And McGill points out something huge here. Their silence isn't just absence, it's defeat. Then, in verse 10, the sailors experience great fear when Jonah finally admits exactly who he is running from. And finally, in verse 16, this all culminates in a massive, great fear specifically directed at Yahweh. These pagan sailors suddenly realize that Jonah's God holds absolute jurisdiction. He's completely overpowering the lesser gods of the sea and storm right in front of them. Section 3. The Migration of Evil, the rā'āh wordplay. So next up is what the reviewer considers to be the absolute most penetrating observation in the entire book. The whole hinge of this observation comes down to the Hebrew word rā'āh, which roughly translates to evil, wickedness, or distress. McGill, leaning on some deep philological analysis by scholar Jack Sasson, argues that the single word acts like a thread, and it literally stitches all 4 chapters of the book into one unified moral argument. The original author wasn't just casually reusing a word here. He was intentionally using it to track a very specific movement. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how that thread weaves right through the text. So, watch this. In chapter 1, rā'āh, or wickedness, rises up from Nineveh. That exact same wickedness generates the rā'āh, or the distress of the violent storm. Okay, fast forward to chapter 3, the king of Nineveh actually repents, decreeing that his people have to turn from their rā'āh, their evil ways. But here is the absolute jaw-dropping moment. In chapter 4, when God decides to spare the city, that exact same rā'āh migrates directly into Jonah's own heart. He is furious. The evil Jonah was sent to confront out there hasn't just been eliminated from the world. It has literally relocated into God's very own prophet. Section 4. Weaponizing God's Grace, the Great Inversion. This brings us right to McGill's most original theological contribution. You really have to notice this catastrophic inversion of grace here. Back in Exodus 34, God reveals his famous 13 attributes to Moses.
You know that he is a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger, abounding in love. Moses takes those amazing attributes and he turns them outward. He uses them to intercede for a highly rebellious Israel. Now contrast that with our guy Jonah. In chapter 4, Jonah quotes those exact same attributes right back to God, but instead of using them for intercession, Jonah weaponizes them as a personal grievance. He's basically yelling, I knew you were gracious and compassionate, and that's exactly why I fled in the first place. He takes God's beautiful, merciful character and uses it as a justification for his own bitter withdrawal. It's wild. And in total contrast to Jonah's bitter certainty, we have the king of Nineveh and his famous question, who knows? Or in Hebrew, mi yodea. McGill argues that when the king says this, he's not displaying theological ignorance. Not at all. He is actually demonstrating profound epistemological honesty. Think about it. He's a created being approaching the Creator with absolutely zero covenant leverage. He doesn't have any ancient promises to fall back on, no long history with Yahweh. He simply repents, throws himself completely on God's mercy, and says, who knows, maybe God will relent. It is literally the ultimate posture of humility.
Now, what's really interesting about this next part is how McGill tackles the sheer theological mechanics of God actually relenting. He maps all the options into three distinct views. First, you've got theatrical sovereignty, which leans pretty heavily toward determinism, basically treating human response almost like a ceremonial script. Second, you have open theism, which suggests God is genuinely uncertain about what the future holds. But McGill argues for the third view, covenantal providence. This is a Wesleyan-Arminian approach where he asserts that God's immutability is about his consistent character, not some rigid constraint on his ability to respond, meaning God can genuinely, authentically respond to human repentance while still remaining entirely omniscient. It's a super rigorous, nuanced position that really bypasses the usual extremes. Section 5. Flaws and Final Verdict. The Critic's View. Let's pivot for a second, because of course, no commentary is perfect. We need to look at the reviewer's objective critique of McGill's work here. The reviewer did identify a few key hermeneutical and structural weaknesses. First off, McGill just assumes Heiser's entire cosmic framework right in the main text, without ever really defending it. So if you don't already buy into the whole divine counsel worldview, you might feel a bit lost until you hit the appendices. Second, for a book that is so hyper-focused on ancient context, it practically ignores the entire history of interpretation. Giants of the faith like Calvin, Augustine, and Luther, they are totally absent, and that isolates the book from centuries of theological conversation. Finally, because this book is just one part of a larger series, it leans heavily on cross-referencing McGill's other volumes. That definitely limits how well you can use it as a standalone resource. So the crucial point is, despite these structural and historical flaws, the reviewer's final verdict is still a very solid recommended. Because honestly, the core exegetical achievements here, like tracing that migration of evil, breaking down the weaponization of God's grace, and that deep dive into covenantal providence, make it a highly valuable resource. It strikes this really rare balance. It gives you the synthetic range of heavy academic scholarship, but it pairs it with a profound pastoral warmth that genuinely connects ancient texts to modern discipleship. And McGill leaves us with one incredibly powerful thought. Will you answer the question Jonah left hanging? Because the book of Jonah ends so abruptly. God asks Jonah a pointed question about compassion, and Jonah never answers. The text just goes completely silent. Well, McGill argues this open ending was entirely intentional. The question literally passes from the ancient prophet directly to us, the modern reader. Are we hoarding God's grace? Are we abandoning our own mission to the disinherited communities of our era? Jonah left the question hanging. So the real explainer of this text isn't going to be found in a commentary. It's found in how we choose to answer that question today. What will your answer be?